Cheltenham Borough Council Planning Committee being held on the 18th of January 2024. My name is Councillor Paul Baker. I'm Chairman of the committee. This meeting is being streamed live to Cheltenham Borough Council's YouTube channel, and the recording of the meeting will be held for 4 years. If there are any breaks in transmission to the YouTube stream, the meeting will be adjourned for a short period until any issues are resolved. To the public present, if you are here to make a representation to the meeting, you are consenting to the use of the sound and video recordings for broadcasting and training purposes. Please be aware that CCTV and audio recording is now in operation in the public gallery. The recordings will be held by the Council for 5 months. Please note, a fire alarm test is not expected, so if the alarm does sound, you should immediately make your way to the nearest exit. Okay, thank you. So, item 1 is apologies. I think we've got a full house, so no apologies. Item 2, any declarations of interest? Nope, thank you. Item 3, any declarations of independent site visits? No, okay, thank you. And agenda item 4, minutes of the last meeting.
Sorry, can we just clarify that we all went on planning view?
Well, we didn't all, but a number of councillors went on planning view. Yeah. Agenda item 4, minutes of last meeting. Members happy they're a correct record? Thank you. Sign those. Agenda item 5, public questions. We don't have any public questions. Which leads us on to agenda item 6, which is 53 to 57 Rodney Road. And I'll ask the planning officer, Ben Warren, to introduce the case. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Chair. So the application relates to 53 to 57 Rodney Road, which are Grade 2 listed and located within the Central Conservation Area. The applicant is seeking planning permission for the installation of a collapsible bollard at the entrance to the access way serving those properties. The application is at Planning Committee, as Cheltenham Borough Council are the applicant and the landowner. So the first slide just shows a site location plan and the position of the bollard. I've got a street view image there, and then another one which shows the position of where it's proposed to be. So the key planning matters are design and impact on designated heritage assets, impact on neighbouring amenity and highway safety. There's no objection or concerns raised by the Conservation Officer, no highways concerns and no amenity concerns. So the officer recommendation is to permit just 2 standard conditions for time implementation and the approved plans. Thank you, Chair.
Lovely, thank you, Ben. Any questions, members? Straight to debate. Anybody like to speak? Councillor McCloskey.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm curious about what's page 4 on my presentations. This is the photograph that shows the location of the proposed bollard, and right next to it are 2 large refuse containers. Are they permanently there? Are they, well, they're in the curtilage of a listed building, I presume.
Thank you, Ben.
So those aren't within the application site, so they're not part of this, they're not part of Cheltenham Borough Council's land. So that little brick wall next to the refuse is the site boundary edge. So not really part of this application.
Thank you. Anyone like to speak on this item? In that case, we'll go straight to the vote. The recommendation is to permit. Those in favour, please show. I think that's unanimous. Thank you all very much. Right, okay. So we now then move on to Lansdowne Industrial Estate.
Yeah, of course you can.
Whilst Lucy's plugging in, it's 3 applications on the same number. Do we vote on them independently or as a block? Because it's the same application number, and if one falls, we don't know, what happens to the other 2?
Different numbers.
So yeah, I was going to just touch on the process for this. Obviously, it's 3 standalone applications, albeit on the same site. So the way we're going to deal with this is that Lucy's going to introduce the major item, which is the 215 homes. She'll introduce that. I'm then going to take all the speakers next. So we have 5 speakers, because essentially they're so interlinked, all these applications. So we'll have all the speakers speaking, and then we'll go on and discuss the first application, 215 homes, in the usual way, Q&A, and then debate. And then Lucy will go on to the next one, briefly introduce that, and so on. Okay. Okay, so I'm just waiting for Lucy to get ready.
Chair, the stream is not working, so you won't be able to watch it on YouTube, but Michael has said we're okay to carry on.
Okay. So the YouTube's not working, the streaming is not working. So obviously members here can view it on their laptops. So I can only apologise to members in the gallery and the speakers. Normally it would be up here, which is far more helpful.
If I may, through you, Chair, press the badge button. Thank you. Chair, just to confirm, even though we're not streaming, the meeting is being recorded and it will be posted on YouTube. Members have already received the presentations, and there are photocopies, I believe, for the public speakers. So there's no detriment to any party, and ask members to just refer to the information they've already been given. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, Lucy, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As the Chairman has just outlined, you'll be aware that there are 3 applications to consider tonight for Lansdowne Industrial Estate. There's an application for the redevelopment of units 23 and 30, and that's a mixed-use residential and commercial scheme, and an application for a new artist studios building. Both applications fall within the southern half of the industrial estate and have been submitted alongside the larger residential scheme for the northern half, which is the principal application to consider this evening. Whilst each of these applications must be considered on their individual merits and separately from the others, you'll be aware that all 3 are linked to varying degrees, and that's largely in respect of their implementation and completion requirements. Members will therefore also need to consider all 3 applications as a whole package, particularly in terms of the proposed Section 106 obligations. Therefore, what we propose to do is to present the larger residential scheme first, so that's 212832. Then hear all the public speakers who may wish to speak on all 3 applications in combination, and then move on to the 2 smaller applications. I think that order should allow a better understanding of the links between the 3 applications. We can, of course, flip back to discussions on the larger scheme when we're talking about the other 2, if that is necessary, and obviously depending on any resolution made by members. The vote will be taken on each application separately, but after we've heard all 3 applications presented and debated, because I think members will need to understand the full details of the other 2 applications to reach an informed decision on the first one. Any questions?
Councillor McCloskey.
Yeah, just a quick question, I think to help me and everybody else. Normally, you change the slides, and we all know you've changed the slide. Could you just tell us page 4, page 5, or whatever? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll say next slide. That's okay. Okay, application 2832 outline. This is an outline application for the redevelopment of the northern part of the estate for up to 215 dwellings with associated access, roads, parking and public open space following the demolition of all the existing buildings on the site. All matters are reserved except for access, and the application is at committee at the request of Councillors Baker and Wilkinson, and also given the scale of the development proposed. So next slide. This is the application site shown in red, and the blue outline is the adjoining land within the industrial estate that is owned by the applicant. There are other buildings on the estate that are not within the applicant's ownership. This is another drawing that illustrates that. So you can see the red line is the extent of the applicant's ownership of the whole estate, and the yellow is outside of the applicant's control, and the blue shaded area is the application site in the northern half. Next slide. This is the submitted parameter plan, which shows the distribution of building heights across the site. So the lighter shaded areas are the 2.5 stories, and building up to the proposed 4 5-storey buildings adjacent to the railway line. There are also 2 areas of green buffers in the hatched green areas, and that just affords a bit of protection from neighbouring properties and neighbouring industrial units. And the grey dotted lines are the sort of street frontage locations. Next slide. And this is the framework strategy plan, or the access and movement parameters, which shows the pedestrian and vehicle access onto Rowan Field Road. That's the only vehicle access into the site, and with other pedestrian links through the southern half of the estate leading out onto Roman Road, which is also a new cycle path. And the green hatched areas are the other internal pedestrian routes. Next slide. This is the revised illustrative site layout drawing. It's indicative only. We're not approving this layout this evening. It's only shown as an illustration as to how the site could be delivered with up to 215 dwellings. Next slide. Some existing site photographs. I think most members attended the planning view on Tuesday, but for those that didn't, a reminder of the current site area and the buildings within it. It's quite a sort of a mix of ages and conditions of buildings. I've moved through a few slides, by the way. I'm now on key planning matters and planning balance. So the key planning matters to consider are the principle of residential development, and that's policy SD10 of JCS, and also conformity with policy MD1 of the Cheltenham Plan, and associated loss of employment land. Affordable housing need and financial viability, traffic and highway safety, industrial heritage and archaeology, landscaping, ecology and biodiversity net gain, drainage and flood risk, the indicative site layout and parameter plan, impact on residential amenity, and that's both existing adjacent properties and the future occupiers of the scheme, infrastructure and community facilities provision, education and libraries, affordable housing, on and off-site open space, and any recreational requirements. Sustainability and renewable energy, proposed public realm and heritage enhancements and capital investment within the southern half of the estate, and Section 106 obligations, heads of terms. So if I just turn to those broadly, because I'm not going to repeat the whole of my officer report, but just to sort of outline the key points to consider this evening. As mentioned, all matters are reserved apart from the means of access. Therefore, the considerations are limited to the principle of redevelopment of the site for residential purposes and whether the site is capable of accommodating up to 215 dwellings, having regard to the site-specific policy requirements of Policy MD1 of the Cheltenham Plan and any other relevant development plan policies. Other material considerations in the planning balance include the industrial heritage significance of the site, the extent to which some or all of the existing buildings could be reused for either commercial or residential use, and the Council's 5-year housing land supply position, noting that the Council currently does not have a 5-year supply. Turning to Policy MD1 first, the proposed development is clearly in some conflict with this policy. The site-specific requirements of the policy seek an employment-led regeneration scheme which may include an element of residential, provided that existing employment provision is offset by a net gain in the quality and/or the number of jobs provided on site. Although MD1 does not offer a quantum for the residential element or preclude residential development, the clear objective of the policy is to retain substantive employment use on the estate. A 100% residential proposal for the northern half of the estate could therefore be considered in conflict with those policy requirements. Putting aside the applicant's conclusions on the housing land supply position and the tilted balance in favour of sustainable development, the applicant has sought to address the requirements of MD1 in two ways. Firstly, they have put forward the two separate planning applications for the southern half of the estate, which will be discussed subsequently. The mixed-use residential commercial redevelopment scheme for units 23 and 30. This proposal offers new commercial units of better quality and potentially with a net gain in employment numbers and visual enhancements to the southern half of the estate and the Roman Road street frontage. The second application proposes a replacement building for the Lansdowne Artist Studios, who will be displaced upon implementation of the larger residential scheme, and again also offers some enhancements to the retained southern half. Secondly, the applicant has identified recent and a medium to longer term capital investment programme for the southern half of the estate and has proposed various public realm and heritage enhancements for this part, with agreement that the implementation of the public realm enhancements will be secured by Section 106 agreements. As a package, officers considered the proposed development and capital investment and public realm enhancements within the retained southern half of the estate address some of the objectives of MD1, and this carries weight in the planning balance. Having reviewed the applicant's building condition surveys and marketing information, officers have also considered the extent to which all or some of the buildings could be refurbished and or adapted for either commercial or residential uses. Given the age and condition of the buildings and the high costs involved, the conclusion reached is that this option has very limited feasibility, and there is little prospect of there being any beneficial long-term employment use of the existing buildings on the site. Equally, officers have also carefully considered the potential heritage significance of the site's industrial past and the historical, evidential and architectural value of the site and its buildings. And the potential for spot listing the site or some of the buildings has also been explored. But I should point out that the site is not located in a conservation area or within the setting of listed buildings, and therefore none of the buildings are afforded any protection from demolition. The Council's Conservation Officer has reviewed the applicant's heritage appraisal and that of the Civic Society. The County Archaeologist has also commented on heritage matters. Both conclude that despite the heritage interest in the historical development of the site, it is clear that the buildings have undergone much alteration during the post-war period, and there is very little surviving fabric or buildings from the earlier industrial periods, albeit the site's industrial past as a whole is of some interest, and that is not in dispute. Officers have also considered the consultee comments, the robustness of the applicant's heritage appraisal, the site's industrial past in general, and the potential evidential historic value of the surviving buildings and its overall contribution to the site's Cheltenham's industrial heritage, which is not in dispute. However, heritage matters need to be weighed against other competing material considerations. In particular, there is no designated heritage assets within or adjacent to the site. Policy MD1, which does not preclude the redevelopment of the site. The Council's housing land supply position, the nature and the condition of the existing buildings and their suitability for conversion to alternative uses, and the benefits arising from the two other applications for the southern half of the estate. Overall, the heritage significance of the application site is therefore considered to carry limited weight in the overall planning balance. Turning to design and layout considerations, although we're not considering these today in detail, the illustrative site layout principles are broadly acceptable and demonstrate that the site is capable of accommodating up to 215 dwellings with associated open space. The parameter plan is also acceptable, other than proposed building heights adjacent to the railway line and in close proximity to neighbouring residential properties in Roanfield Road. A suggested condition addresses this concern and would allow the Council to consider appropriate building heights in this location at reserve matters stage. Having assessed the viability of the scheme and subject to review at reserve matters stage, 40 on-site affordable units could be delivered. This figure could move up or down depending on the circumstances at reserve matters stage when a review on viability would take place. There are no overriding amenity concerns, and any noise impacts from the railway line and adjacent industrial units will be dealt with at reserve matters and following submission of a noise impact assessment. The Highway Authority raises no concerns in relation to traffic impact and the proposed access arrangements, and is supportive of the proposed new pedestrian cycle link path onto Roman Road. There is agreement over the Section 106 heads of terms and obligations, including the affordable housing, education and libraries provision, implementation and management of open space, potential off-site improvements to recreational facilities in the local area, and the links between the three applications in terms of the timing of their implementation and completion. In conclusion, officers have taken into account the site-specific policy requirements of MD1 and any conflict with that policy, the various off-site proposals to address MD1, the condition and age of the buildings and their heritage significance, the long-term sustained employment prospects for this site, the contribution of affordable and market housing in alleviating the Council's 5-year housing land supply shortfall, and the other economic, social and environmental benefits of the proposed development. In this instance, and on balance, officers consider the benefits of the proposals outweigh the harm, and the recommendation is to resolve to grant planning permission subject to conditions. The decision will be issued upon the completion of the Section 106 agreements and the Secretary of State Environmental Impact Assessment screening request, which is outstanding. I've just run through the conditions very briefly, and I'm not going to discuss all of them, but these are just some of the sort of more unusual ones for this application. It's the last page of the presentation. So the development will need to accord with the parameter plan, framework strategy and illustrative master plan in part, where they're dealt with by other conditions. The phasing of construction demolition works would need to be approved. The implementation of the off-site highway improvement works, that's the cycle and pedestrian route onto Roman Road. The construction waste management scheme during construction, compliance with the ecological survey, and the submission and approval of a landscape environmental management plan, and also biodiversity net gain. Noise impact assessment, external lighting, public art, and industrial interpretation, which could take the form of interpretation boards and design references within some of the buildings, and an updated energy and sustainability statement. And there's no gas supply connection to any building. Thank you, Chair.
Lucy, thank you very much for that introduction. Okay, so we've got a number of speakers. We're going to take all the speakers now, and then we'll go on to the application. So each speaker has up to 5 minutes. I will be quite strict, but hopefully that's plenty of time. We recently changed the rules. It was 3 minutes, but now it's 5. Sorry if you didn't know. So the first speaker I'd like to call in objection to the scheme is Steve Bryson. Steve from the Civic Society. Is that Steve? When you're ready, Steve. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Steve Bryson and I'm one of the trustees of Cheltenham Civic Society. Before retirement, if I don't mind you giving a short intro, I specialised in the organisation and management of pre-application public consultation on major property development proposals across the UK. My first projects in that field were Cribbs Causeway in Bristol and the Black and White site in Cheltenham. And I went on to manage more than 50 major schemes across the country, totalling many millions of square feet of development and a combined development value in excess of about £5 billion. My clients included some of the biggest names in property investment and a range of local authorities, including yourselves, bringing housing and Waitrose to the St James site, which was extremely controversial at the time. My last project was to help Cheshire West and Chester Council deliver its massive Chester Northgate proposal, a redevelopment of a whole quarter of the Chester city centre. But having now retired and turned from poacher to gamekeeper, I'm appalled by my former clients' treatment of their staff pensions investment at Lansdowne Industrial Estate. Their consultants have adopted a tick box approach to community engagement, and that's the worst I've seen in more than 30 years, especially as they totally excluded our town's key interest groups, such as the Civic Society. We have now been trying to talk to them about their plans for Lansdowne for more than 2 years. But they and their Mayfair consultants have simply refused to engage with us. I'm sure that I don't need to remind you that Chester's council and their pension fund are public bodies, and they really ought to do so much better. That said, I'd like to turn now to the key planning issues, starting with the policy issue. Your policy, MD1, sets out a requirement for this site to be a mixed-use redevelopment with, and I quote, employment-led regeneration, which may include an element of residential. That's may include. So, how on earth can their proposal for a banal development of 215 homes be squared with your policy requirement? Employment land is also one of the key issues here. With your Cheltenham West development cutting off any industrial expansion space to the west, the failure to include new employment uses on this site will drive any future expansion to much less sustainable sites elsewhere, potentially even to other towns. And then there is the Localism Act of 2011, which places a duty on local authorities to cooperate with each other. There are no geographical boundaries to that, and as far as we can see, Cheshire West and Chester Council has done everything it can to avoid cooperation. What's more, it is trying to foist onto our town a low-grade development that I know from my personal experience with Chester that they would never give the go-ahead to be in Chester. Now, turning to environmental issues, the Council, of course, has officially recognised that we're in the middle of a global climate emergency. Yet it looks like you are about to nod through a scheme that will release huge amounts of carbon through the demolition of what remains of our town's industrial heritage. The Civic Society has gone to great lengths in our publications and multiple letters to both sets of councillors that the heritage buildings on this site can be reused in a mixed-use redevelopment. But such suggestions have fallen on deaf ears, both in Chester and, shamefully, in Cheltenham.
Steve, you have 30 seconds.
Cheltenham is an outstanding town, much loved for its heritage, but we are in danger this evening of rolling over to Chester's very poor quality scheme. So please send them back to the drawing board and make them consult properly next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry I interrupted you there. Okay, we now move on to our next speaker. That's Jill Waller. Jill, you have again 5 minutes to speak, and you're speaking against the application. Thank you.
I'm Jill Waller from the Cheltenham Local History Society. The heritage appraisal of the northern half of the Lansdowne Industrial Estate was woefully under-researched. As the only person to fully researched this site, I was able to identify over 60 errors, misinterpretations and omissions in the appraisal. This site is of national importance, not just local significance, as so much of what came out of Lansdowne can still be seen. William Leatheran, who set up an ironworks there in the 1860s, was hailed as the greatest art worker in the country. With contracts won at home and internationally, his work can be seen not just in the V&A, but locally around Montpellier Gardens, where he supplied the railings and gate piers for Cheltenham Borough Council. The impressive curved iron roof of Bristol Temple Meads was produced in Cheltenham by Leatheran's neighbours, Vernon and Ewan's Central Ironworks, who also established the first permanent electricity installation in Cheltenham. They were followed on the site by Wayman and Hitchcock's Trusty Engine Works. James Wayman took out patents on the Trusty oil engine with John Henry Knight, the early motorcar pioneer. H.H. Martin's wonderful achievements are better known to the town. H.H. Martin & Co. took on the site in 1907, renaming it Sunning End, and erected most of the buildings that remain today. I've been able to date these and identify most of their original purposes. The Second World War bomb damage has been exaggerated. Only the water tower, the office block, and Unit 8, which was a tools and spares store, were irreparably damaged. The post-war alterations and rebuilds have been overstated and misunderstood. The shells of most of the original Sunning End buildings remain. They were repurposed over the decades, adapting to changes in core businesses. So the 1898 Unit 1 was reutilised for the establishment of the Gloucester Aircraft Company in 1917, until its removal to Brockworth in 1926, leading on to the establishment of Doughty's. Unit 1 was then repurposed for fitting ship interiors, furniture making and polishing, and so on. Unit 11, initially built for fibrous plasterwork, hence the large water reservoir under the building, not mentioned in the appraisal, but was adapted for assembling aircraft components. The 1917 Arts and Crafts canteen and toilet block are now offices. The 1920 iron foundry is used by a car mechanics business. Surely some of these buildings could be repurposed again, as demonstrated in their history, perhaps as mixed use, and the last traces of Cheltenham's important industrial and artistic heritage be preserved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jill. Our next speaker is Simon Firkin, who's the agent for all three applications. Simon.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair. Members. My focus is on the north of the estate, with perhaps a little crossover with the others. Mr. Duckering from the Lansdowne Artists will speak to you about the replacement studios. 3 years ago, we had very positive pre-app with officers. More detailed pre-app followed, pre-app with highways, meeting the task force, and what we feel was extensive community engagement. Local people and councillors at that time raised some concerns, but nothing which could not and has not been addressed. The result is a really good solution. The effective reuse of a brownfield site in the PUA, a new studio for the artists, a strategy for the continued enhancement of the south of the estate, and a host of other significant benefits. 2 applications were submitted in December 21, with the art studio following last year after discussions with officers and the artists. I think we've had a total of 4 different planning officers and 5 heads of planning. None of this could be helped, of course. some continuity has suffered. Nevertheless, the applicant has willingly provided extra information. They've exercised patience, in my opinion. For example, imagine after this application had been in for a year, to see the council say for the Oakley Farm appeal that there were no sites coming forward outside the AONB to meet housing need. I think most reasonable people would agree that developing 200 or so units on a classic brownfield site like this is far preferable to a similar number on an exposed sloping greenfield site in the AONB. The site is highly sustainable. Whilst it might be technically possible to retain the existing buildings, the significant cost of doing so, along with the inability to make them as energy efficient as new buildings, does not make it a viable solution. In non-technical terms, and forgive me, the existing buildings, as our surveyor put it, are essentially shot, to the extent that some had to be demolished a few years ago. They've been marketed for years without success. Current occupants benefit from greatly discounted rents, which would simply be unaffordable if the units were modernised as suggested by some others. The viability work has been independently checked and verified. This is not to avoid contributions, but to ensure a development can be viably built out whilst also providing what it can. The report shows officers have spent much time looking carefully at heritage. We're not in a conservation area. There are no listed or locally listed buildings. If one agrees with our heritage consultant or a local historian, to me is not really the issue. The issue, as I see it, is whatever heritage value the buildings themselves may have had in the past doesn't exist anymore. As you would have seen on site, buildings have been extensively altered over time. Their condition is evident. Anyone going around it would be almost unaware of how the site was originally used. Heritage interpretation boards and references to its past in the new design will create a far better awareness of the site's heritage than exists now. As an allocated site, the policy for it would have looked carefully at all the issues, and it makes no reference to heritage. The benefits here are many. For example, providing energy efficient market and affordable housing where there's no 5-year supply, making effective use of brownfield land in a sustainable location, creating better connections to the station and the Honeybourne line for pedestrians and cyclists, removing the vehicular cut-through from Roanfield Road, a commitment to continued investment in the southern half of the estate and public realm enhancements. There's BNG of over 2,000% and facilitating a purpose-built long-term home for the artists. And on that, I note that more than 40 of the 50 or so objections specifically refer to the loss of the studios. With new studios secured, those concerns are addressed. There's no objections from statutory consultees. The applicant has worked exceptionally hard to address where it can the issues raised. And I think the report's conclusion is clear. There are very few adverse impacts here, and certainly none which significantly and demonstrably outweigh the numerous and substantial benefits. So we respectfully ask you to follow the recommendation for all 3 applications. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. I'll now ask Mike Duckrew to speak. Mike is particularly talking in reference to the art studios. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm speaking as chair of the Lansdowne Art Studios Association. Lansdowne Art Studios is a not-for-profit organisation that provides over 20 affordable studios for local artists, many of whom have studied art at the university campus here in Cheltenham. We support the full application for a new art studios building that will replace our existing, quite dilapidated and non-compliant studios. We also support the outline application for residential development, which, if approved, makes it possible for the new studios to be built. I would stress that initial objections to this application due to the potential loss of the studios no longer apply and have been withdrawn. All artists are passionate about art. Art has no boundaries, and it is open to all without limitation. Art enriches our lives. It is good for our mental health and physical well-being. Above all, art is the visual expression of our cultural identity, and Cheltenham has developed a unique cultural identity, particularly in its festivals. But art is the poor relation. At the grassroots level, artists are struggling. the growing pressures of high property values and new development threaten those few places available for artists to work. In the summer of 2022, the Council carried out a cultural survey, and it came as no surprise to artists that the survey exposed the shocking lack of affordable studio spaces. For example, we have a constant waiting list of over 20 or more artists needing studios. It is 2 years since the original outline application was submitted for redevelopment of the northern part of Lansdowne Industrial Estate, including demolition of the studios. We thank all those who, in that time, have given us much active support for retention of the art studios that have served the community for 25 years. We also commend the applicant and its professional team for taking a pragmatic approach and working with us to find a viable solution for accommodating the art studios in their development plans. These applications now represent a unique opportunity to not only provide much-needed new housing, but also to secure the long-term future of the largest group of art studios in Cheltenham. Finally, I would say rent for the new studios must be affordable, and this will require financial support. We respectfully ask the committee and officers to consider whether the proposed Section 106 agreement for the residential development should also include some contribution towards the cost of the new studios. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. We now have two councillors to speak. First of all, County Councillor and Ward Councillor, Councillor William, and then Borough Councillor Richard Pinniger. So, Dave, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to start with a procedural matter. Policy SD12 about the publication of viability reports. If you look on public access, the officer report into this was published on the 11th of January. On the 15th of January, you published the viability assessment, which was dated the 11th of December. It's a 75-page document, and you then published the heads of terms on the 17th of January. The viability assessment is a material document, especially as the agent and the DVS disagree on the value, and 75 pages published after the officer report has already been written suggests that you have no intention of properly having public consultation on that. And that is disrespectful to the public who might wish to comment on it, and to members of this committee and to councillors who might wish to make representations. It's not acceptable. I've raised this issue about viability before. It can't be commented on properly. In terms of the applications themselves, fully in support of the artist studios. In terms of the main application, I am very concerned about Rowanfield Road. Rowanfield Road is already a rat run every time the level crossing barriers go down. And they are down for a long time, more for the convenience of Network Rail than for safety reasons. And when that happens, cars speed down Rowanfield Road. You are putting more residential frontage on this road, and you are therefore increasing the risk of a collision between a rat-running vehicle and a pedestrian or someone coming out of their driveway onto the road from the new development. I don't think this is something that prevents the development being done, but I think it needs some sort of contribution or some sort of management to try and slow the traffic down, because once the development is done, I would look to get the road resurfaced, and at the moment, the potholes slow the cars down. Another issue of transport is the Stagecoach bus garage. The agent of change principle has to apply here, which means if Stagecoach can currently do noisy works on buses at 3 in the morning, then the noise insulation on the buildings must allow that to continue. Because if you get noise complaints that shut the Stagecoach garage down from doing noisy maintenance on buses at 3 in the morning, so the work has to be done during the day, then you will destroy the transport ability, public transport, in Cheltenham because the buses will be off the road to be repaired during the day. In terms of conditions, and as an example, condition 18, there are some deficiencies. There are no, whilst 18 says about the binder course must be there before occupation, there's nothing about completion. Before the final 5 or 10 dwellings are occupied, the snagging issues need to be completed. We have developers who have developed large sites, not completed stuff, and disappeared, and trying to get them to do anything is nigh on impossible. So these developments should be completed, as in gates put on substations and things like that, before the developer's allowed to occupy the last 5 or 10 properties, because that's the only way you will hold them to account. There is nothing about uplift, as far as I could tell, if the viability assessment happens, if the developer makes more profit, there needs to be uplift so that we get more affordable housing, possibly through a contribution for off-site affordable housing. 40, I think we get 40 when the policy is that we should get 50. So if there is an uplift, if they make more profit, then we should get money up to getting the next 10 affordable houses, because we have people who need housing and we need affordable housing for people like our key workers. In terms of 6B, the smaller development on Roman Road, as one of the objectors has raised the issue, there is an opportunity to get rid of flat roofs so that gulls do not cause noise nuisance. There are concerns about the safety of the access. Roman Road is narrow, but it's very narrow, and it is a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit at the moment. Having a two-way cycle access on that, because it would be pointless to have keep the one-way for cyclists, needs something looking at, for example, dropping the speed limit to 20 to make it safe. And the final question is about parking permit management, which is whether that development is entitled to permit zone parking for Z15. And that's been raised by objectors. And I think that is a pertinent issue to the County Council to have negotiated with the borough. I'll finish there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor William. Councillor Pinniger.
It seems a great shame to lose this industrial heritage. However, personally, as someone who works in manufacturing, I have to say that these are cheap sheds that were thrown up 100 years ago, abused by industry ever since, with modifications on modifications, until they're in a tumble-down state that they are now, full of holes and an eyesore. Consequentially, they're not suitable for modern industrial practices and have been abandoned. In addition, the subsite, the earth underneath, is possibly polluted with chemicals that are banned or controlled in modern production sites. And the evidence for that is that the stream that used to run through St. Mark's was put into a culvert many years ago to control the smell of the chemicals. It's difficult to get people to redevelop brownfield sites. They much prefer a greenfield site. So to say that it's a poor quality scheme, perhaps where it's situated, it's not such a valuable area. It's actually in keeping with the area, as the valuation report shows. No local residents have contacted me directly about the loss of the industrial site, and objections are more concerned with traffic, which David has been dealing with, and whether their properties will be overlooked, which I note are in the conditions. We do have things that were made at this site, and for me, that should be enough. We need smart new housing, and this is a great place to put it, close to the station, with only active travel links facing the town centre. For those who do feel nostalgic, I should mention some of the artists in the studios are capturing the essence of the old site in their work right now, and these are available for sale should you so wish. Now, I've got a few specifics. I did request a path along the railway bank, and I was told by the consultants that They do have a right of access all the way along the railway bank. I think that would be better, routing pedestrians and cyclists through there rather than through the industrial site where there are HGVs. Presumably buses are better with pedestrians than HGVs because that would be shared with the buses. I'm really pleased to see the arrangement for the art studios and want to congratulate Liberal Democrat PPC Max Wilkinson for all the effort he put into this as Cabinet Member of Economic Development, Culture, Tourism and Wellbeing. And as for the passage, Unit 22, the main story from the residents there is of an increased fear of crime because they already have crime, antisocial behaviour down behind the Midland pub. And they think if there's a place to hide, then there will be drug dealing taking place in there. And the other issue with that is that they're planning on putting a two-way cycle path onto Roman Road, but Roman Road is a one-way street. So there's no way to get from Gloucester Road into this two-way cycle path. So something needs to be done about that. Maybe an S106 agreement to put a drop curb through the pavement so that the cyclists can get down Roman Road. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all the speakers for keeping to time. So we now move on to member questions, and I'm sure there will be a few. I would just first of all want to pick up on a couple of the things raised by the speakers, if I can, Lucy. Can you just touch on, I think the uplift that Councillor Willingham referred to is covered by conditions, so that if we get more money from the scheme, we'll get more affordable homes, but if you could just confirm that. And in terms of the binder finish on the roads, it is a point, isn't it, that many developers don't actually finish off their estates. And is there any way that we can toughen up the conditions to make sure they finish the roads to an adoptable standard before the estate is completed? Thank you. And then I'll go on to Councillor Wheeler next.
I think you just touched on one of my questions there.
Sorry, so can I let Lucy answer the first two?
I beg your pardon.
We'll take them as we go. Thank you.
That's uplift in terms of the affordable housing provision and the viability review. Yeah. The Section 106 will have a review mechanism clause within it, so that at the point of reserved matter submission, viability will be reviewed, because obviously in a few years' time we won't know construction costs. And there also may be vacant building credit that's applicable and sill relief on existing occupancy of the buildings within the last 3 years. So it could be that the affordable housing contribution numbers go up or they go down. Depends on the circumstances at reserve matter stage. But at the moment, 40 are anticipated, but the scheme is not it's not viable with a policy compliance scheme. The binder course matter, this has been asked on many occasions. It's whether it will pass the test, because road adoption is reliant on a third party, and it also involves the adoption of sewers, so Severn Trent as well. So I think in this instance, no, we couldn't amend the condition to include that the roads become adoptable. But obviously binder course and having a suitable access to an occupied dwelling is important, and that's covered by the current condition wording.
Thank you. Councillor Wheeler.
Yes, my one question was about the roads being to an adoptable standard when finished. I would like to say that I'd insist on that, but the other thing that always gives me concern, and it doesn't really show it in the indicative plan here, but also I would like to see pavements rather than shared use roads. Can you give me some indication as to whether those two will be in the plan? Sorry, I think there was a third. No, that's it. Oh, yes. And the third one, so the pavements, I would like to see pavements. Are they intending to do that? although that'll come with final matters. Will the roads be adoptable? And also, at the end there, you were talking in terms of air source heat pumps, in that this will be a new, albeit brown field. Can we be asking not just for air source heat pumps, but ground source heat pumps? They're far more effective, far more efficient, and they can't be fitted retrospectively, generally speaking, but at the time of development, ground source heat pumps would cost a little more, I would suspect, and be far more effective.
Thank you. Lucy?
Obviously, we don't have the detail of the street layouts, street designs. It is likely that there will be pavements. I think that is generally preferred. There may be some cul-de-sac areas that that have a more of a shared pedestrian vehicle design. But obviously, we don't have that detail. That will follow at reserved matter stage, and any concerns can be raised at that point. Markers, yeah. And the same applies to the adoptable standard of roads. Obviously, any of the internal streets, the majority would presumably be adoptable, but it's those offshoots that may be with a shared surfacing that they may not be adoptable. But I would imagine a site, given the indicative layout, they're not showing cul-de-sac spurs. It's a linear street pattern. I would assume that the roads would be of an adoptable standard. But obviously I can't confirm that today. And air source heat pumps versus ground source, a revised energy and sustainability statement will be required at reserved matters, and it's then that those issues will be explored, because we need to see evidence as to why not ground source heat pumps or a mix of air source and ground.
It was just in, within your conditions you had down air source heat pumps, if it could be air and ground source, air or ground.
We could amend the condition, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor McCloskey.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 4 questions, 3 of which come directly from things we've heard. The first was the comment from the Civic Society about the employment land supply. I wonder when the policy about the Lansdowne industrial site policy was created, and it was before all of the Golden Valley development. So I'd like some comment at some stage as to how much of an issue it is that we now no longer have opportunities to have industrial land at the west of Cheltenham. That was question 1. The second one is about the heritage. I thought it's absolutely fascinating things, and regardless of what actually happens, we mustn't lose that. And I wanted to go a bit further. There is talk about heritage display panels, but there's a very finite amount of stuff you can get on a display panel. We've now invented QR codes, and I think certainly on the display panels there should be some QR codes, but it may be, we've got the Civic Society here as well, the notion of a blue plaque. If this is where all of these wonderful things happened, stick a blue plaque on the building with a QR code, and they can do a presentation, they can do a video, they can do whatever they like. We have to celebrate our history, but we don't have to look at a wrecked building to achieve the same outcome. The third question is my question. Most of people know that I have an electric car, so I do take a particular interest in the EV charging. And it talks about charging points will be provided on all the buildings. Normally we're dealing with domestic dwellings, private houses. So it's great. I come home after this meeting, I plug in, and my car will be ready next morning. a number of these buildings are industrial units. Well, it's no use having a 7 kilowatt charger there because you need something that will give a lot more oomph in a short period of time. Either it's because people have commuted to work and they're charging their work during the working day, or they've got vehicles that are doing things and they need to charge them up. We're doing a wholesale development here. I think we should be quite specific that industrial units get more higher spec chargers. No doubt they get 3-phase supply, so as a minimum they should be up to 22 kilowatts. But I have looked more than once on the app to see how many high-speed charging points there are in Cheltenham, and the answer is virtually none. Certainly, for me to drive here and plug the car in the expectation it will be fully charged by the time the meeting's finished, that is not an option. I commend to you Banbury, which has got a site just off the junction 11 of the M40, 32 charging points capable of parallel, rapid, ultra-high-speed charging, 64 cars at a time. Now, that would encourage me off the motorway to enjoy Banbury whilst I'm charging my car. This is a sensible site. I would have thought there's a need for, a block of high-speed chargers so that customers coming to these industrial units can plug their car in, and whilst the thing has been done, so why not? Yeah. Oh, sorry, my last question. Councillor Willingham very rightly pointed out the late arrival of documents. It's not acceptable for a document that dated December to arrive on the portal the day before. I haven't had a chance to look at the viability assessment because my life yesterday was complicated and I was doing things today. I've certainly not given it the attention it deserves. So can we have some comment about the acceptability of late documents arrivals, because developers are notorious for doing this. They dump revised versions of documents a few days before the planning committee. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll let Lucy and Robert Chris respond.
Okay, the first question Councillor McCloskey asked was about the housing, employment land supply and West Cheltenham. As far as I'm aware, and I may be corrected, but there is employment proposed as part of the West Cheltenham strategic allocation proposals. So I'm not understanding the question.
My question was the assertion made over there that now that we'd foreclosed the option of industrial units in West Cheltenham, there was more of a need to retain Lansdowne as an industrial site. I may be misrepresenting the gentleman, but that's the gist of what I thought he'd said, and I was just querying whether that was our understanding of the future supply of industrial land.
I don't really have anything more to add because West Cheltenham does provide certain hectarage of employment land, as evidenced in the current applications before Council. The second question was regarding heritage interpretation and QR codes. The condition requires the submission of the details of that heritage interpretation, which could include interpretation of laws, it could include other things. And QR codes is one thing that we could consider as part of that, so that is noted. The EV charging and the higher spec for industrial buildings, for this particular application, it's 100% residential. There are no industrial buildings. That could apply for the second application that we'll discuss next. And there is a separate condition for the commercial element of that in terms of EV charging. And the specification for that is required to be submitted and approved, so we'll take note of that comment as well. The issue around the viability assessment report publishing, the draft report, final draft report, did come through in December, correct? But it was in draft and not for publication. But obviously that was considered and shared with the applicant, and it did form the basis of my committee report, which I had to meet certain deadlines to get the report published for committee. The redacted final version arrived late last week or early this week, but it may still have the same date on it. I didn't check the date, but it actually arrived early this week, I think. And obviously that's now been published as a redacted version because of the sensitivities of a financial viability statement.
Thank you. Any other members? Councillor Nelson and Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if this is the right time, but will the reserve matters cover things like wherever we can to reuse some of the bricks to retain a bit of this heritage, a bit of this nostalgia and a bit of our heritage from past? Because when we walk down on Plan View, there are some items that would benefit from being incorporated into the new development. But I take on board what Richard said. One has to move forward, and but that's a question for now.
Lucy.
Thank you. Yes, we can certainly add that to the condition, the relevant condition, that where feasible, because it could be that some of the reclaimed bricks are not suitable for residential properties in terms of meeting building regulations, etc., etc. But there could be that added as a possibility that should be explored.
Lucy.
My question.
Councillor Clark.
Yes, my question. I must apologise. I have explained to the chair and the head of planning. I have a problem with my vision at the moment, so I may have missed this. I do apologise. As there are stated issues with seagulls, I do feel like sometimes it's Samson and Goliath, and I wish I had a slingshot. If we are asking for PVs on the roofs, if we are conditioning that the roofs should not obscure the view from the houses, the back of the houses on Roman Road, could we ask them to cage the PVs so that birds can't nest underneath them, because they do? It's a known problem. It would be good to state that now, rather than these new residents and the old residents, Roman Road, having the misery of nesting seagulls, and they're particularly vicious when they're nesting as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy.
At this stage, we don't know the extent of flat roofs on any of the buildings. I would imagine there would be predominantly pitched roofs, and I don't know whether the seagull nesting issue is the same for a pitched roof with solar panels. Obviously, the details of the solar panels are required to be submitted by condition. At that point, we could then consider caging. But I've never added that sort of restriction at the outset on a condition. That's something that perhaps we can discuss at a later stage.
Any other questions? Okay, so we'll go into debate. Who would like to kick off the debate? Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. Very complex. First of all, let me say really an apology to the applicant for taking 2 years to get to the committee stage of an application. To my mind, that's unacceptable in any form. But we're here now, and there is an opportunity to provide housing which is much needed on an ex-industrial site. When I say ex-industrial, forges, I don't know if anybody's been in a forge or ironworks. I used to work in engineering, used to go to casting companies, I've been in Bell Foundries, and I've also not been there, but I've also read a lot and seen a lot of the Pangolin Foundry up in Stroud, which is still carrying on fantastic heritage work. So, but let me talk about H.H. Martin's and the report given by the Civic Society. My father worked for H.H. Martin's. There's a man who I worked with at Smiths Industries who is still alive, who worked on the Speaker's chair. And they're the people we should be celebrating the heritage of our industrial past. Most foundries are filthy, horrible holes. You wash thoroughly when you come out of them, especially when you've done a shift in one. There's no place in today's towns for that sort of works. We used to have 3 working blacksmiths in Cheltenham. You wouldn't want a blacksmith shoeing horses up the Bath Road like they used to. And we used to have tailors' eyes and skins. Very necessary business, but you wouldn't want it in the middle of town. The viability of the art studio, I'm absolutely I'm grateful for that. I have a son who has a first-class honours in fine art and an MA in art therapy for people with disabilities. It is a wonderful media art. I've supported it all my life and I will continue to. The viability of the art studio obviously depends on the housing, because without the housing, you can have no art studio. But my father worked on the QE2, and he joked not long after he came back, when they closed the place, they sent me on a 3-week cruise, a working cruise on the QE2, and then they sacked me. And craftsmen and artisans broke their tools when they left H.H. Martin's because they had been sold down the river. Because they, as it says in your report, that it was always a profitable, viable business. It was just more profitable and viable to set it off as cash and carry, is what they did in the first place, which was tragic. The heritage will live on because what they made, the artisans within that, will be around for a long, long time, and has been around for long. You mentioned Temple Mead Station, still there, cast iron. Wouldn't want to make it now, but it would not comply with modern engineering practices and things like that, and shorten people's lives. The road adoption is not a borough problem, it's a county problem. We have estates in Cheltenham that have been built for 15 years and more, where the roads have not been adopted and are unlikely to be. So that's the county to make sure they're built to a standard that is adoptable. Pavements and highways, county issue as well. That's their thing. But this is a good, viable scheme. As I said in the first place, it should never have taken 2 years to get here. And I thought this afternoon, just imagine if it took 2 years to bring the Cyber Centre to Planning Committee. We'd be leaping up and down as councillors because we've invested a lot of money. These people have done the same. So we must be more aware and work with it. I did ask Mike, who was our senior planner up until a few weeks ago, for details of the number of applications that have expired the statutory times. He said he would do it, but I'm still waiting. But it would be interesting to see how long they've expired. I think the Civic Society has one that is a year, just about a year, and that's on Paramore House.
Can we stick to the application?
Yes, certainly, but this is part of the application, the bringing it to committee. The Roman Road, the cycle path, I think most cyclists would go down one-way streets the wrong way anyhow. And if there's a cycleway there, they'll probably find their way down there. It is narrow. I used to live at 21. It's narrow because people park on both sides of the road. But don't tell them to take their cars away because there's nowhere to put them. It was built before the motor car. But I will support this application, 6B, and I look forward to seeing it done. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member? We can go to the vote. If
No, not voting.
Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I thought other people might want to speak as well. I think we've heard some very good comments from both sides tonight. I'm a sentimentalist. I'm Cheltenham born and bred. I worked at Doughty's. But I think if we can do what we've just talked about with the condition and use some of the buildings, have the heritage boards and embrace our past, but recognise that we have to, as a town, move forward, have sustainable homes for our youngsters who need to have jobs and who need to have somewhere to live that's affordable. I think it is a very a good scheme. One thing I would like, I made a note there somewhere, sorry, it's gone. Something this lady said behind me. But I know, the water reservoir, Unit 11. I presume that's going to be reserved matters as well, where we have to have some sort of conditions about making sure we do enough groundwork with all these, I think it was Richard said all about the chemicals underneath the ground and this reservoir under Unit 11. Is there any danger of that having a bad impact on the development and how it goes forward? But that probably is in reserved matters. But I think overall one has to support this application. Thank you.
Anybody else like to speak? I think I'll just say a few words. I mean, it's a significant application. I don't really want to speak for the sake of it, but I just want to say a few words. There clearly are some difficulties with policy EM2 and with policy MD1, but I think we have to look at the overall benefit of the scheme, and it's like this. We do not have a 5-year housing supply. We know how much emphasis now planning inspectors are placing on the lack of a housing supply, and we don't have that, so that's really important. I can't think of a more sustainable location for a scheme like this, next to the railway station, within a residential area, with a Tesco and a petrol station around the corner. I think it's a really sustainable location, providing much needed homes and affordable homes. And, we've had a fantastic history lesson, but we all move on, and sites evolve, and Cheltenham has got a very, very finite amount of land, and it's absolutely paramount that we make the very best use of it. And I think we're doing that with this application. And the heritage will not be lost. We already know, and it's already been said, that the applicants, when we see the reserve matters, when we look at the designs of the buildings, that hopefully they will take something from the industrial heritage in those designs. Not to mention, as Councillor McCloskey said, the display boards, which can be extremely interesting when they're well done. I think there's a lot of opportunity to remember this heritage, but actually move on and provide a really viable site and homes for people in Cheltenham. So we're not going to go to the vote on this one now. I got that wrong. So we're now going to go on to the second application and then the third, and then we'll vote on all three because they're so interlinked. So, Lucy, did you want to briefly introduce the next one, which is the units 23 and 30? That's 02828.
Thank you, Chair. So as mentioned at the start of this evening's meeting, this is an outline application for mixed-use redevelopment at units 23 and 30 of the estate, and it's a mix of residential and commercial, with all matters reserved apart from the means of access to the site. Next slide. Site location plan shows the site in the context of the southern half of the industrial estate. The parameter plan, which indicates the rough area for residential and the commercial units to the rear, plus the allocated parking behind the commercial units and the pedestrian cycle link onto Roman Road. And this is the existing and the proposed indicative site layout. So on the left is the existing footprint of the buildings. And the one on the right is the proposed distribution. And this, again, is the indicative site layout with sort of broad concept of the design and massing principles of development. It wouldn't necessarily look anything like this, but it just gives an indication of potentially what could be delivered in terms of the general design sort of principles. So obviously that's showing a 3-storey building fronting Roman Road, and there is a condition restricting the height of that to 2 stories or no higher than the existing building. And current site photographs. This is the commercial building fronting Roman Road, which has been vacant for a number of years. And again, some photographs of within the site showing the back of the site, looking at it at the back, towards the back. So the key planning matters, some similar to the previous application we've just discussed, is the principle of residential development and policy ST10 to JCS. Again, conformity with policy MD1 and loss of employment land and policy EM2 and the Cheltenham Plan. Traffic and highway safety. Again, ecology and biodiversity, drainage and flood risk. The acceptability of the parameter plan and consideration only of the indicative site layout and design principles. Impact on residential amenity, that's existing adjacent properties and the future occupiers. Sustainability and renewable energy, and the implementation and link with application, the larger residential scheme that we've just discussed, and the associated Section 106 obligation. So firstly, this application has been submitted both as a standalone redevelopment scheme and a scheme to be considered alongside the proposed 250 dwellings. In both respects, the application seeks to address the requirements of Policy MD1 of the Cheltenham Plan, in that proposals for the redevelopment of the industrial estate should be employment-led with an element of residential. The proposals are considered to adhere to the objectives of MD1 and EM2, as this redevelopment scheme would result in a net gain in the quality of employment land provision, an enhancement to the public realm of the industrial estate, in addition to there being a proposed element of residential, which also offers a potential enhancement to the existing residential street scene on Roman Road. With those policies in mind, the implementation and completion of this scheme, alongside the build-out of the larger residential development on the southern half of the estate, would be secured by way of Section 106 obligations, as set out in the agreed heads of terms. For example, trigger points would be set for the commencement and completion of the proposed development at certain stages of the construction and occupation of the larger residential scheme. Turning to sort of design matters, the design and layout principles shown on the parameter plan are broadly acceptable, but there are concerns over the potential scale and massing of the building fronting Roman Road, and as such the eventual height of proposed buildings in that location could be restricted by the planning conditions set out in the officer report. Essentially, that building should not exceed 2 stories in height, or no greater than the height of the existing building, whichever is the greater. The development would again be non-gas served, but there would need to be a noise impact assessment required at reserved matter stage to assess the potential noise impacts of the nearby and proposed commercial units on the future occupiers of the proposed dwellings on this site, and also occupiers of the adjacent existing dwellings. The Highway Authority raises no objections, and the details and implementation of the proposed cycle and pedestrian link onto Roman Road would again be secured by a condition attached to this obligation and Section 106 obligations in respect of the larger residential scheme, such ensuring that that link is provided at a suitable point in relation to the 215 dwellings. The recommendation is therefore to grant planning permission subject to conditions. And I haven't summarised them all here, but obviously the reserve matters will need to accord with the parameter plan, with the exception of that building height fronting Roman Road. Various design details will be needed: external appearance, materials, biodiversity net gain details, landscaping, cyclone refuse, etc., etc. Again, the noise impact assessment is required, a construction, traffic, environmental management plan, an updated energy and sustainability statement, and no gas supply. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lucy. Any questions on this one? No? Who would like to speak? Anybody like to speak on this? No. In that case, then we'll move on to the third application, which is the Art Studios. Sorry, Lucy, straight back to you again.
Thank you. So the third application is an application for the erection of a single-storey building to accommodate artist studios, intended to provide a replacement accommodation for the Lansdowne Artist Studios, which would be displaced by application 2021-2832, the larger residential scheme, should that be approved. Next slide. This shows the application site in relation to the southern half of the estate. So it occupies a section of an existing parking car park within the site, unallocated parking spaces currently. And also you'll see the juxtaposition of neighbouring residential properties to that site. An aerial view of the site, giving it a bit more context. An existing site photograph. Proposed block plan, showing the general layout, and the retained parking spaces. Areas of refuse store next to the boundary, and the air source heat pumps will be located at the rear of the building, with dedicated parking spaces at the front of the building, including a disabled space. It's a bit of a clearer ground floor drawing. And elevation drawings. It's a fairly sort of simple design, but functional, and obviously it's been designed in consultation with the artists themselves. And the roof plan, next slide, indicating solar PV and roof lights. And this is a concept image corresponding to the elevation drawings, just to give you an idea of what the finished building could look like, or should look like. So the key planning matters for consideration, again, conformity with policy MD1 of the Cheltenham Plan and policy EM2, the design, scale and layout of the scheme, traffic impact and loss of existing parking, landscaping and BNG, drainage and flood risk, impact on amenities of neighbouring land owners, sustainability of renewable energy, impact on trees, and the implementation timing of delivery of this building and the link with application 22-2832 with the larger residential scheme, and associated 106 obligations and heads of terms. Clearly, this application has been submitted as a direct result of the displacement of the Lansdowne Artist Studios, should planning permission be granted for that scheme discussed today. The new building will be delivered by the applicant in terms of the construction itself. They would fund the construction and carry out that construction, but with the Lansdowne artists responsible for funding their occupation of the building. The implementation and delivery of the new studios, alongside the build-out of the larger residential scheme, would be secured by way of Section 106 obligations, with trigger points set for the completion of the artist studios and corresponding occupation of a certain number of dwellings within the southern half of the estate, albeit accepting that there will be a period of displacement of the artists. In design terms, officers consider the appearance, scale, layout and massing of the proposed building acceptable and an appropriate architectural response to the intended end user. The development will be non-gas served, but with a noise impact assessment required in respect of the 3 air source heat pumps proposed at the rear of the building. An arboricultural method statement is also required to mitigate any potential harm to the roots of the adjacent eucalyptus tree. Having reviewed the submitted parking survey, the Highway Authority raises no concerns over the loss of existing parking spaces and potential for parking displacement onto neighbouring streets. Although the intended use of the building is not necessarily employment generating or traditional industrial use or office use, the proposals are not in direct conflict with MD1 or EM2, as there is no loss of employment land per se, and the proposals would offer an enhancement to the retained southern half of the estate. The recommendation is therefore to grant planning permission subject to conditions. These are just a few of the key ones. Obviously solar panels, air source heat pumps, details of those, highway construction management plan, a noise impact assessment for the air source heat pumps, and an arboricultural method statement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lucy. Any questions, members? Councillor Nelson, Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you, Chair. Just taking on the point earlier, on the recommendation conditions, we need to put air source stroke ground source heat pumps on condition number 1. We talked on plan view about the timing of this and whether or not we could have a condition to somehow minimise that transition disruption for the artists moving into their new home. Is there anything that we need to say publicly in this meeting to somehow wrap that up and label it with some sort of condition on time constraint? I know you couldn't guarantee they could move and there will be some displacement. Can we put a time limit on it?
In terms of ground source heat pumps, that is not proposed. They are actually proposing air source heat pumps. It's a full planning application. So we'll just have to, we can't pursue the ground source potential. And the timing of displacement of the artist studios, we don't know. There will be a period of displacement, but it is unknown as to how long that displacement would be. It's an outline planning permission. It could take 5 years before there's any sort of commencement of works on site once we've been through the reserve matters stages. The Section 106 obligations will deal with that to some extent in terms of commencement of the residential scheme alongside the commencement of the artist studios, and the artist studios potentially needing to be completed before a certain number of dwellings are occupied. But those discussions will need to be in depth and carefully thought through. I don't think there's anything else we can do in terms of speeding up the process at this point in time, but again, those matters would be discussed during Section 106 negotiations.
Thank you. Councillor Wheeler.
Yes, very disappointed. Councillor Nelson has pinched my thunder. I was going to ask about the air source stroke ground source. You said it's not something that we can change, but would ask that if the agent is minded to have second thoughts, if it is possible to. I don't know what the difference in cost is, but it's something that can easily be done on a new site. It can't be retrofitted.
Thank you. Councillor Fisher.
The question that's just struck me, when the studio is built, the ownership will be by, I assume, the applicant. And who determines the rent? I suppose that's a negotiation between the studio and the applicant. At least you'll be getting cheaper electricity.
I think you've answered your own question there. Okay, any more questions? Councillor McCloskey.
Well, Councillor Fisher has just woken me up to the solar panel thing. One of the challenges when you're putting EV charging points is where you mount the box or the pillar or whatever. The parking spaces outside this building are face onto a wall, and that is certainly a possibility. Maybe not at this stage, but certainly I'd like to, at some stage, be assured that people visiting the artists can plug in their EV and charge. Yeah, if they're going to be there for 2 or 3 hours, they would want it to be charged by the time they've finished their creative stuff. So I think I've probably said enough about EVs already, but yeah. Thank you.
We know it's your specialist subject.
Charging their e-bike.
Did you need to come back, Lucy, on that? I don't think so. Any more questions? Anybody like to speak in the debate for or against? No? Okay, so in that case, then what we'll do now is we'll go back to the votes on all 3 applications. So the first application, and there are some amendments to conditions which we talked about. One was the ground source heat pump on the first big development, and also about you reusing bricks potentially as well. So the first application that we'll vote on then is 02832, which is the outline permission for the 215 homes. Those in favour, please show. Okay, thank you. I think that's unanimous. The next application is for units 23 and 30. That's application 02828. Outline. All those in favour? Again, that's unanimous. And then finally, we move to the studios, 00728, full application. Those in favour? Again, unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. I think that concludes the applications. Just the notes, we had an update on the appeals within the minutes, so that's been circulated. There's no other items. Sorry, Councillor Fisher.
I don't really want the answer now, but it's the opportunity when we're all... 6 Marsh Lane, the appeal, could you get the officer to give me a shout on what the costs against us were, please?
Thank you, that's been noted, yeah. Councillor Seacombe.
Thank you. This is something I mention each time we have the planning meeting. I just wonder if we have an update on the tents outside 131. I have an email which I received only this afternoon. Seems to me there's something wrong with the system that allows continuous appealing which only benefits 131. Can a line be drawn under this appealing stuff? If there's an answer to that, I would be grateful to receive it, or a time span.
Chris, do you want to update us on that one?
Thank you, Chair. All I can really say at this moment in time is that an enforcement notice was served very recently. So that's been served against the owner of the property, and we'll wait to see how that plays out, really.
What the sort of length of time that's likely to take? I mean, how long do these enforcement notices take to be enforced?
I don't have it in front of me, so I couldn't confirm the period for compliance. But what I can say is that there is a right of appeal against enforcement notices, and so I wouldn't expect the issue to be resolved in the short term. But I can provide some more clearer timescales outside of this meeting.
Thank you, Chris. I think we all share your concern, Councillor Seacombe. So without further ado, thank you all very much for attendance and have a good evening.